Welcome to Prejim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 18 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll learn about binding a drop-down list to an XML file. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch part 16 and 17 of this video series. In part 17 of this video series, we have discussed about binding a drop-down list to a database table. In this session, we'll learn about binding a drop-down list to an XML file. Just like how we can use a database table to store data, we can use an XML file as well to store data. For example, here I have this countries.xml file, which has got countries root XML element, and within countries we have got country elements, and within each country element I have country ID and country name. And if you look at the sample data, we have got 4 countries: India, US, Australia, and UK. And if you look at the drop-down list on the right-hand side, we are displaying all these 4 countries within the drop-down list. In addition to these 4 countries, I also have another list item in the drop-down list, which is select. It's not present in the XML file. So where is this coming from? How to add this element to the drop-down list? We'll look at that in a demo. Let's flip to Visual Studio. So the first thing that we have to do is to add the XML file to our ASP.NET Web Application project. To do that, go to Solution Explorer, right-click on your project, and select Add New Item. And from the Add New Item dialog box, select XML file. Give that XML file a meaningful name. In our case, let's call that countries.xml. Click Add. So that adds the XML file to your ASP.NET Web Application project. But make sure you right-click on the project, not on the solution, because if you right-click on the solution and select Add, you will get an option to add a project to a solution, because a solution is a collection of projects. Alright, so within this XML file, we need to add countries data. Just to save some time in typing, I have this in a notepad, so let's copy that from there and paste it here. So we have the XML file ready. Now we need to display this XML data within a drop-down list. So let's flip to the web form. Let's drag and drop a drop-down list control onto the web form. Right click on the web form, select View Code. Let's go to the code behind page. In the page load, we want to read from that XML file and display that within the drop-down list. So to read the data from the XML file, the easiest way is to use the dataset object. So we have the dataset object. So dataset ds is equal to new dataset. And by the way, this dataset object is present in system.data namespace. So make sure you use this using statement. Alright, so once I have this dataset object has got a read XML method. Now this method is capable of reading the XML data from an XML file, and then it loads the data into the dataset. But then obviously, if it has to read data from an XML file, it needs to know the path of the XML file. So if you look at the IntelliSense here, the parameter that it expects is the name of the file from which you want to read the data. So in our case, the name of the file is countries XML. So let's copy the name and pass that. And if you look at this, obviously file name is a string, so we enclose that within double quotes. Okay, so with this line, we have the XML data in the data set. Now once we have the data in the data set, it's pretty simple to bind it to the drop-down list. All you have to do is drop-down list 1 dot data source is equal to data set, and drop-down list 1 dot data bind. Okay, cool. But then another important thing that we have to do is we have to specify the data text field and data value field. Because if you look at the XML data, we have got country ID and country name. So which value do you want to show in the drop-down list, and which value you want to actually hold as the value of the list item object? Okay, how do we specify that? Using the data text field and data value field properties of the drop-down list object. So drop-down list 1 dot data text field is equal to, what is the data text field that we want to display? The country name. So let's copy that, let's paste it here, and then the next thing that we have to specify is the data value field. And data value field is nothing but the country ID, so let's copy that and paste it there. That's it. Now if we run this, it's going to break, and I'll tell you why it breaks in a bit. So let's run this. So it tries to read the data from the XML file, but then it will not find that XML file. Look at this, could not find file. If you look at the exception, system.io.file not found exception. Now if you look at the path, it's looking at this path. Do we have the path, file at this path? No. Where is the file present? If you go to the Solution Explorer, right click on the solution and say open folder in Windows Explorer, the file is actually present, the XML file is present at this path c:\adodemo/adodemo, because this is the name of the solution, the solution folder, and this is the web application folder. So at this physical path you have this XML file. Okay, remember, at this physical path, this is the physical path because this path exists on this computer. Okay, now let me show you another way of accessing this XML file. Now if you want to access this XML file, let's close this browser window first. Right click on the XML file and say view in browser. Look at this. Now the XML file shows up in the browser window, but look at the path. Okay, so this is your URL to access that XML file in the browser. Okay, so these URLs are actually virtual paths in the sense they don't really exist on this computer. This URL is somehow mapped to this directory, adodemo, and then within that it has got countries.xml. Okay, so if you look at the physical path of that one, it's this one, c:\adodemo/adodemo/countries.xml. But this somehow got mapped to this path, so it's capable of displaying that. Okay, now obviously if you have to read from that XML file, what you will have to do is you will have to map this virtual path to a physical path, and to do that we can make use of a method called mapPath. Okay, server.mapPath. And if you look at the IntelliSense, this method returns the physical path that corresponds to a specified virtual path on the web server. So countries.xml, give me the actual physical path of this file. Okay, so this one is going to return that physical path. Actually, to prove that, let's assign this value to a variable. Let's create a variable here, string, let's call this str physical path. We'll pass that there, and then we will use that variable to pass to this method. Okay, let's throw in a breakpoint here so that we know what's happening when we run the project. So when we run the project, what's going to happen? This method is going to get the virtual path, and then from that virtual path it returns the physical path. And if you remember, let's go to the solution Explorer. If I right click on the project and let's say open folder in Windows Explorer, look at that. The physical path of this file is actually c:\adodemo/adodemo/countries.xml. So if we go back to Visual Studio, look at that. It gives me the actual physical path of that file. Okay, now if I press F5, you should expect the drop down list to show all the countries as expected. So remember, the server.mapPath method is used to return the physical path for a given virtual path. We will talk about this server.mapPath in a great detail in a later session. Alright, so the next thing that we want to do is, okay, now if you look at the output, we have got all the countries, India, US, Australia, UK. Those are the 4 countries that we have in the XML file, and that's what we see here. Alright, so now let us see how to add this select element to this drop down list. Okay, now obviously we know that a drop down list is a collection of list item objects. So obviously if you want another list item object in the drop down list, you will have to create that and add that to the drop down list. So how do we create a list item object? We have discussed about this in the previous session of this video series. So please check those parts first before continuing with the session. So let's create the list item object. So list item li is equal to new list item. And the 2 important properties, parameters that we have to specify are the text and a value. Okay, the text that I want to display is select, and value, probably -1. because this is not a country, this is just a prompt to the user to select that country. Usually we use -1. Later when we actually talk about validation controls, you will understand why we are using -1, because we use that as the initial value for the required field validator, which knows that okay, the user didn't select anything, it still select the initial value. We'll talk about that when we actually talk about validation controls, so don't worry. For now, this is the text and this is the value of the list item object, and now I want to add this to this drop down list. And to do that, simply we can call dropdownlist1.items dot I can use the add method and then pass the list item object. And look at that, when I pass that to the list item object, let's see what happens when I run this. Obviously this drop down list will be bound to that data set, and then we created that list item object and we added it. But then if you look at this, it added that list item object at the end. So that's what the add method does. The add method adds the list item object at the end of the list. We don't want that. We want to insert that at the beginning of this list item collection. So how do I do that? Instead of using the add method, there is another method called insert. So if you look at this method takes two parameters. So obviously you want to insert this list item object in the collection of list item objects you have in the drop down list. So when you are using this insert method, obviously you will have to tell at which location do you want to insert that. I want to insert that at the 0th location, meaning at the top of the collection. So I pass in 0 as the first parameter, and the next parameter is obviously the list item object that you want to add to the drop down list items collection. That's it. So now if we run this, we get the output as expected. The select element shows in the 0th position, which is top on the list, and then the rest of the countries here. See, the only thing to remember here is how do we read the data from the XML file into the data set. We can make use of that read XML method, and to this read XML method you will have to specify the file path where you have the data, and to do that we are using the server.mapPath method. What does this method do? It returns the physical path for a given virtual path. And obviously to insert a list item at a specific location, use the insert method. On this slide you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.